America is in fiscal trouble. The federal budget has more than doubled in the past 10 years thanks to a spending binge by both Bush and Obama. But the long-run outlook is even more troubling thanks to a combination of entitlement programs and demographics. What does this mean for America? I'm Silvia Morandotti, a student at Università degli Studi di Milano, and I'm going to help answer that question in this Economics 101 video from the Center for Freedom and Prosperity. I will give you some rather grim news from my country of Italy, as well as from other European nations that have taxed and spent and bored their way into fiscal crisis and economic stagnation. I have 5 simple lessons. 1. Higher taxes mean bigger government, not lower deficits. 40 years ago, the burden of government in Europe was only slightly higher than it was in the United States. But the politicians began to raise taxes and raise spending. And when they raised taxes, they almost always said it was to be fiscally responsible. They kept telling people that higher taxes would mean less red ink. But as you see on the screen, higher taxes went hand in hand with higher spending, and deficits and debt continue to climb. There's an interesting debate in the academic literature about whether higher taxes lead to higher spending or whether higher spending leads to higher taxes. That might be fascinating to a fiscal policy economist, but Europe shows that Milton Friedman was right when he warned that politicians will spend every penny they collect and then as much as they think they can get away with borrowing. Number 2, specifically, do not allow politicians to impose a VAT. Simply stated, there is no way to have a European-sized welfare state without a European-style tax system, and a value-added tax is what enables much bigger government in Europe. The key thing to understand is that there is a limit to how much money that can be collected with an income tax. Politicians rarely admit this in public, but they understand that high tax rates and other class warfare policy don't generate much revenue because of the Laffer curve responses. People shift their behavior in ways that reduce taxable income. So if the political elite want more money, a VAT is the only realistic option. But that's exactly why a VAT should be resisted, unless you want to wind up like Greece, Portugal, Spain, and also Italy. Number 3, big government slows growth, but also cripples the human spirit. One of the most discouraging consequences of the welfare state is that many people get lured into lives of dependency. Societies are successful when people produce, and this requires a form of social capital, the values of self-reliance, work ethic, deferred gratification, and independence. But when governments create excessive welfare states, the safety net begins to resemble a hammock. At first, not that many people will take advantage of the programs. But over time, the ability to mooch off the government proves very tempting, and more people are seduced into lives of sloth. And those bad values then get passed on to subsequent generations. And don't kid yourself, this is very hard to restore social capital once it has been destroyed. 4. Nations reach a dangerous tipping point when a majority of people live off the government. We just explained how the welfare state destroys the human spirit. But now let's look at what happens when a majority of the voting age population decides it is okay to live off the labor of others. On the screen, you're going to see 2 cartoons that I drew. One shows what the welfare state looks like when it first begins. There are a lot of people pulling the wagon and only a few genuinely needy people riding in the wagon. But as people figure out how to milk the system, the ratio is reversed. The number of people riding in the wagon expands, making it hard for the wagon to move. The people still producing get resentful and begin to either walk away or climb into the wagon. But from a political economic perspective, the real problem is that the people riding in the wagon are very unlikely to support the types of reforms needed to save the economy. In other words, once a majority of the population is getting benefits, working for the states, or is otherwise dependent on government, it's hard to see how society can be saved. 5. The last message of this video is that bailouts don't work. We've already seen a couple of bailouts for Greece, but that's just a direct from the handouts. The European Central Bank has been forced to surrender its independence and is providing indirect bailouts by buying up debt from the countries that have taxed and spent and borrowed their way into crisis. But have these bailouts worked? No. Instead, they have subsidized continued excessive spending by the politicians. If you're an American, you might think this is not your concern, but it is. Thanks to the crowd at the International Monetary Fund, you're helping to finance these reckless bailouts. And every time one nation is bailed out, it sends signal to politicians in other nations that they can postpone necessary reforms and instead wait on money from Uncle Sam and the IMF. I want to conclude with a warning. The real problem, not only in Europe, but also in the United States, is that government is too big. Higher taxes and bailouts are like drugs that make the problem worse by leading to even more spending and more dependency. I hope America wakes up before it's too late. Some European countries are probably already past the point of no return, and many of the productive people in those nations have viewed the United States as an escape option. But if America also goes down this path of welfare state collapse, there will be no safe haven for any of us. I am Silvia Morandotti from the Università degli Studi di Milano. Thank you for watching this Economics 101 video from the Center of Freedom and Prosperity. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you share this warning call with others. Ciao e a presto!